Hello, dear friends. Patrick here again. Just want to follow up my video from yesterday where I was talking about uh, the collapse of globalism by Ralston Saul. I was talking about how it's got some insightful commentary on the global economy, and I just wanted to follow up on that. Page 107, I made a note here. The author compares global economics to competing forms of religious redemption, i.e. Christian forms of redemption. It shows that the author is pretty sick and twisted. He takes every opportunity he can to take a swipe at the Christian religion. It's his pastime. And so I made a lot of notes in it. He always considers nationalism and populism as humanity acting at its worst. And he always puts globalism, he's always pushing a better form of globalism as the solution to all of humanity's problems, when his own documented atrocities, his own words reveal just how much a failure these globalization efforts have been. Anyway, there was one part that I just wanted to point out to you, if I can find it here. He often refers to the prism of economics that globalism uses now, that globalism has implemented. And this phrase, prism of economics, is simply another, a euphemism really, for the term globalism itself. You can call it the corporatocracy. You can call it global neo-communism, global authoritarianism, elitism, or even neo-feudalism. But he calls it the prism of economics. That's how we should look at the world now, through these globalist efforts. But there was one thing that he wrote that I thought was actually good. He mentions a couple of times, he makes statements that one would consider as being good. He quotes Confucius. He says, "A gentleman helps out the necessitous, those that are in need. He does not make the rich richer still," right? That's a good statement that he throws in there. Every once in a while, he'll throw in the good with all the bad. But he's continually pushing his own vision of socialism and communism as a subset of corporate power, if such a thing is possible. Let me just find the part that I wanted to share with you, and that's on page 139. As I mentioned, I thought if I find anything that I think is worth sharing, I would share it with you. And from page 139, the chapter entitled "A Negative Equilibrium," he writes as follows. "We have seen there's a fundamental contradiction between two promises of the globalization movement, that there would be a decline in the power of the nation state." So he's making that plain, right? The promises of the globalization movement, they said they were going to decline in the power of the nation state. That's been successful as far as I can see. Along with a growth in the number of democracies and in their vibrancies. There's no proof that that's occurred, or even that that was their intent. But democracy is an expression of the nation state. Democracy is an expression of the nation state. It is an expression of the role and the power of individual citizens inside those states, an expression of their ability to engage in national choices to set the direction of the nation state on internal and external matters, to define the nature of the public good. Their power applies directly to the structures and choices of their state. Weaken the nation state through the idea of inevitable international forces, and you cannot help weakening your democracy. A quarter century of civilization being restructured through there's that verse again, the prism of unstoppable economic forces could only undermine those nation states and democracies that were anything other than rock solid. There, boom, right? Weaken the nation state through the idea of inevitable international forces, and you cannot help weakening your democracy. That's exactly what has happened in Canada. A quarter century of civilization being restructured through the prism of unstoppable economic forces. Remember those definitions for this prism of economics I just mentioned earlier? This prism of unstoppable economic forces is just a prism of socialist authoritarianism, and any other terms that you want to call it. Through the prism of unstoppable economic force could only undermine those nation states and democracies that were anything other than rock solid. Well, what nation state has a rock solid democracy? We see now that there's no such thing as a rock solid democracy. It's been attacked through these efforts of international forces, these globalization forces. So after he makes this statement, I feel like we've just practiced kung fu in the garage together. Like the author's now is my best friend. Yeah, we're having a great time together. I'm excited. And he finally said something truthful after 140 pages that jumped out at me. And then he even goes on to make a funny point at the bottom of page 140 where he says, this was an illustration of something common in the new global economics, the vaporization of money. He talks a lot about these mergers and acquisitions that were a big thing, and they vaporized money and paid all these money managers huge salaries. They continue to do so. But then look what he goes on to say. Vast sums of money entered into the marketplace just as quickly seem to evaporate without any particular effect, as if they had been sucked up into the sky like the bodily assumption of the Blessed Virgin. With a comment like that, right after he gets me on his good side by making something lucid and understandable about the global forces being a detriment to the nation state and destroying democracy. And then he comes out on the very next page, on page 141, having to make this trite, unnecessary slag. I just find it extremely disappointing. No wonder his name is Saul. Yeah, that's quite accurate, actually. Page 143, citizens and their governments rediscovered that they're far stronger than large corporations. I'm surprised that he even dared to say that. They are stronger because they can shape events by creating policy through choice, as opposed to the transnational corporation, which accumulates power by reducing choice. There we're friends again. And he gives a nice quote on page 144 from Sophocles. Money, gentlemen, money, the virus that infects mankind with every sickness. We have a name for no greater scourge than that. See, I like the fact that he throws in these valuable insights, historical insights of great thoughts in between all his elitism and in between all his eulogy for globalist efforts. He says here on page 146, what is the imbalance? Unacceptable levels of unemployment, job security, exploitive work conditions? Well, he cuts it pretty short, doesn't he? He's talking about the effects of globalization and the imbalance that it causes. What about the unacceptable levels of the difference between the rich and poor? He doesn't mention that. You kind of stopped a little short there, didn't you, Mr. Saul? And what is the solution that is behind all these efforts? It's depopulation. The corporatocracy and the globalist elites are jumping over themselves to figure out a way to maintain profits while at the same time depopulating the planet so they can save the earth for the long term. And of course they're trying everything. It's not through a prism of economics. Since this book was published in 2005, that prism of economics is long gone. What they were doing in the background was not visible to the average citizen. Now it's front and center. It's no longer a prism of economics. It's a prism of ideology. And they're trying to figure out a way to keep this imbalance. They don't want to get rid of this imbalance. They want the billionaires to keep getting richer and richer and richer. And their crony friends and their management friends in high levels of the corporatocracy, they want to increase those profits for them. They don't care about the poor. Nike shoes being made for $1.60 in Indonesia and sold for $70 around the world. And here's a nice tidbit that he throws in on page 149. In 1841, Paris forbade the hiring of children. It was forbidden to hire children under 5, and they limited the workday of those 8 to 12 years old to 8 hours a day. If you were between the ages of 12 to 16 years old, they limited the workday to 12 hours a day. Imagine the conditions. You're 5 years old and you got to go work in a factory prior to 1841 in Paris. The creation of the ILO in 1919 to try and implement humane conditions of labor. There have been improvements in the global conditions. He throws in a lot of depressing statistics. So it is a harsh read when you take in some of these harsh statistics. 6 million children under the age of 5 died in 1992 alone from pneumonia or diarrhea. And he says, is this really accurate? How accurate does it need to be to suggest a failure on a global stage, on a global basis? That these globalization efforts are not doing anything to alleviate the massive amount of death in children in developing nations of the world that we are oblivious to here in the West. Have such things got steadily worse under the leadership of the global system? Yes, he admits on page 151. Yes, he answers his own question. Globalization must carry responsibility for the growth in violence and the ineptitude that has allowed epidemics to get out of control, and not just medical or disease epidemics, epidemics of all kinds he doesn't mention, but he should have mentioned epidemics of violence, epidemics of corruption, epidemics of disease. And then he does a chapter, NGOs and God, where he makes fun of NGOs because they're run by, among other groups, reborn, he calls them. He's afraid to use the term born-again Christian. He calls them reborn Christians. What a dink. Anyway, God bless him. He's obviously had access to a ton of information, which is not available to the average pleb like myself. But I'm going to finish it because I'm already on page 157, a chronology of decline. Let's see what else he has to say. So I'm a little over halfway through. Wanted to share a couple of those things with you because they did jump out at me. I'll try and put some of them in the notes below in case you need to reference this for whatever reason. I wanted to show you my wonderful shirt that I'm wearing today. Can I see that? Pretty proud of it. It was a gift from somebody I love dearly. Thank you for watching. I hope you're doing well. God bless you. I hope you're happy. I hope you're working towards truth, freedom, righteousness, wherever you are. And that I hope we can have a better future by cooperating, caring for our neighbor, our community, our country. Caring for our nation state shouldn't be considered a crime, shouldn't be considered a bad word, right? Globalization does not have all the answers, has been proven and admitted to, even by this elite intellectual who has been around the world and been around the block, obviously a lot more than the average citizen. So anyway, God bless you. Thank you for watching. And if there's anything else that jumps out at me, I'll share it with you. And then we'll talk to you soon, okay? Take care of yourself. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.